near town, Floyd Rudd, Iowa, which is near Charles City. And the folks moved out there, and they lived out there 3 years. I was born in November, and we moved back in March. So since March of 1906, I've lived in this area. I've lived within 5 miles of Washington all my life. We lived on a little farm out here, northwest of Washington, which my folks owned, 4 miles northwest of Washington. And we lived there until I got married in 1929. I married a girl from down by 10 Mile. Her name was Frida Cook. We got married in 1929. And my uncle actually owned what is Sunnyland, what started Sunnyland. My uncle owned it, Uncle Henry Essig. He was in the grocery business years back in Washington. Had a regular grocery general store. And in this general store, why, he would have, we bought flour by the barrel, but it came in 50-pound bags. And you bought salt by the barrel, which was in wood barrel. That's the way you bought salt. But if you went in a grocery store, why, the clerk waited and got all your groceries. You tell them what you want, and they'd write it down on a ticket, and they'd get all the groceries for you. And you didn't go around and get the groceries yourself. You could go look at the things, and they'd have, most of the things were in baskets or boxes, and they sold it to you in bulk, and they would weigh it out, maybe 2 pounds, 5 pounds, or whatever you want. Sugar, you buy by the 100-pound sack, unless you just want a little, when you buy bulk. But most of the people that had any families, and it seemed like most families were pretty good sized families. They would have maybe 6 or 8 children. But they would go in. They would go into town once a week to get groceries, supplies. That's about all every time. Only time you went to town, except on Sunday, you'd go to church on Sunday.
Well, you had to go to town to some groceries.
Oh, once a week. Once a week you go to town for groceries. We usually, when I was a boy on the farm, we milked quite a bit, and Mother made butter. And we made butter, or she made butter in regular pound butter, like it is today, shaped like it is today, but it would have 2 clover leaves on top. Clover leaf on each top, and half a pound of butter, but it's only 1 pound. And she made as high as 100 pounds of butter in a week. And she'd make that on Thursday, and on Friday, we would take that butter, and of course our eggs, during the week. And this butter, when we made butter, it would have buttermilk. And we would take that buttermilk in jugs, half-gallon or gallon jugs. And the skim milk that we would have when we had milked the cows, we had a separator. And we'd turn the separator by hand. You'd have to turn it by hand, pour the milk in a tank on top. Maybe you've seen some old separators around. And have 2 spouts on, the cream would come out on one, and the milk would come out the other one. And that skim milk, we would take in and put in where it was warm, and then we'd make cottage cheese out of it. A little bit like the cottage cheese they have today, only in the stores today you buy small curd or large curd. But ours was real smooth. It was just nice, real smooth cottage cheese. And of course, a lot of them at that time, we were Germans, and we would call it smearcase. So we would take these things that we had, of course, in the wintertime, while we would butcher hogs and take pork sausage, sell pork and that. We very seldom sold any beef. because we had dairy cows and they weren't near as good to eat as far as beef. But hogs, why, when us boys got a little bigger, why, we butchered quite a bit, and we'd take sausage on every Friday, sell quite a bit of sausage. Maybe spare ribs, backbone, whatever we had on the hogs. And then we'd, my brother and I, when we got a little older, why, we would go hunting. We had a little dog that used to hunt. Real good little hunter. And at night we'd go out and hunt possums and skunks. And the skunk, of course, the possums and skunks both we'd keep for the furs for the sale. And it was pretty good price. We got a good possum or a good skunk, especially a good skunk. It was pretty black. Well, we'd maybe get up to $5 for a fur. And the possums, well, the possum meat we used to take along to Peoria on Friday, especially if we got it the night before on Thursday. Why, Wednesday or Thursday night, we could take that meat into Peoria and sell to the colored people.
What did they do with the skunk fur?
Oh, why, they'd make all kinds of furs out of it.
Do they make like coats and stuff?
Coats and things, yes. Of course, when I went to school one time, I had a string of traps, or had some traps set at different dens. And when I'd go to school morning, well, I'd run these traps to see if I would get a possum or a skunk. One morning I happened to get a skunk, and my uncle August Essig will tell you about that yet. And when I killed him, why, he happened to get a little spray on me. But I was kind of late getting to school that morning, and the bell rang, and of course, we all had, every district had just a little schoolhouse. We had all 8th grades in the one room, one teacher. And one teacher would teach the whole school, all through the 8th grade. Well, I got to school that morning, and of course it was just a one-room school, and a big old round pot-bellied stove, and it was kind of a cold morning anyway, so I got there just about the time the bell rang, and I hurried right in, got into my desk to my seat. After the room got to warming up a little bit, why, the school teacher, my uncle, said, Henry, he said, I believe we'll excuse you for today. Because that odor got pretty strong. When it warmed up in the schoolhouse, why, it got pretty strong. But there were probably, we probably had 15 or 18 in our school altogether.
Do you remember the name of your school?
Oh, Columbia School.
Did they have separate desks, or did they have like one bench? Or?
Well, we had usually, at first we had two, just a double. Two of them sat on a desk. And they were double. Instead of where they had, like most of them have now, singles, why, it used to be double. But, double desks. But as I say, that's the only school I ever went to. I never went to high school. I never got to high school. My oldest brother, why, when he was in the 7th grade, why, he had to stay home in the spring and start with the farming, help with the farming. Because Dad wasn't able to do the farm work all, so he had to stay home and help with the farming. And when I got older, I did graduate. I got my 8th grade. Graduated from 8th grade. And then I had to stay. I never dropped out. Or high school. But, and when we farmed, it was a little like this program that you just saw. We plowed the ground with horses and a walking plow. And we disced it, 4 horses on a disc. And you'd harrow, you'd have to walk behind the harrow. Work it down. And of course, we did have a planter, which you rode on the planter to plant the corn. We had a drill, which we drilled with it. But you did all with horses. There weren't any tractors. There weren't any tractors until I would say probably, the first tractor that I would say that I ever remember was about 1930. And about 35 then, there was a few more people got tractors. I got married in 1929, and then I farmed what was started Sunnyland, 92 acres. And I farmed that for 5 years. So on the north side of the road, and that house that we lived in was the house right across from that church when they're just building, adding on to that church. That's the house that we lived in. We lived there 5 years. And then when we moved, from there we moved out northeast of Washington on a farm with our cousins. But a neighbor boy then farmed that place for, I think, 3 years. And then my uncle sold it to, I can't tell you who they were, but to some realtors that subdivided and sold it to Sunnyland. Made it out as a subdivision, Sunnyland. And that's when Sunnyland started. And from then on, why, these other additions, why, started. One after the other, Beverly Manor and so on.
What year would you say that was?
Well, I would say that was probably about 1938.
When Sunnyland started, did they still have the dirt roads?
No, there was hard road in front of Sunnyland then.
Blacktop.
No, it was hard road.
Was it?
Well, when they went from gravel, why, they went to hard road.
Oh.
They paved it. And of course, they paved the hard road or graded it all with mules and scrapers and dump road. They didn't have no trucks or that. When they graded the road, got it ready for the pavement, for the cement. But when they cemented it, they did have trucks that they ran and hauled the cement. And it wasn't mixed at that time. They had a mixer and they mixed it right on the job and then they poured it right in. That's where they built this hard road, 24. But, of course, and when we were younger at home, why, we didn't have things to go to. At school, we would have what we called literary. And kids that went to school, they'd get up a little program and wanted to make a, you know, like the things that you have in your classes maybe. You would have a poem that one would recite. We had little dialogues that we had. And we would have that maybe once in a while on a Wednesday night.
At school, did you ever have like school projects or anything?
Not that I recall.
Did you have like spelling?
Spelling bees, spelling contests between us, and we'd choose sides. We'd have two of them, and maybe two of the older
To like captains?
captains, and they'd choose sides. And then the teacher would give us words to spell. And we'd see who was the best, which side would win the spelling contest. But as far as going to things, why, we didn't go to town to shows or anything like that when we were younger at home. We'd go to visit the neighbors maybe once a week. That was the only thing we'd do. And to go, why, lots of times, a group of young folks, if we went to a neighbor's place, a group of young folks got together, why, we'd take a team and a wagon. We would all ride away. That's about the activity that we had between us neighbors. Very seldom did you ever go to town, except like I say, on maybe Friday or Saturday to get the groceries, and then on Sunday, we'd drive the horses, team, and a buggy to go to church on Sunday school. And that was every Sunday. It wasn't any question whether we were going to Sunday school or church this Sunday. If tomorrow was Sunday, boy, tonight we'd take our bath, and tomorrow morning we'd get ready, we'd do the chores, and we'd go to church on Sunday. There wasn't any question whether we didn't go. We was going to go or didn't go. We never went to nothing else. I mean, no matter what else was going, it was very seldom that there was anything else doing. And on Sunday morning especially. Now, sometimes it'd be something Sunday afternoon. Not very much Sunday morning.
No dust on your boots on.
Oh, no. Not on Sunday. If it were any other day, we couldn't go And there weren't any stores open. The drugstore was the only store that was open on Sunday. No grocery stores or nothing else.
Did they have like one doctor for the town?
Well, I would say when I remember, there was two doctors in Washington. Dr. Bennett and Dr. Mansfield.
Well, when did Dr. Monroe come?
Well, Dr. Monroe came then about the time Dr. Mansfield passed away. Stop.
I know he's been here for many, many years.
Oh, yes. But Dr. Mansfield, he was our doctor when we first, first that I ever remember when I was a little kid. Dr. Mansfield was our doctor.
And he lived in that house right next door to where Dr. Rome used to have his office now. I mean, you know, right there on the corner of Walnut Street.
In High. Or High, the office that used to be
Yeah,
Dr.
I know.
Mansfield's office. And when I was, well, when I was home yet, there was the neighbor lady going to have a baby. And at that time, there was a few cars. In fact, the first cars I would say that I remember was about, 1915. And then if you bought gas for a car, well, you'd buy it at the grocery store. You'd go in and take a 5-gallon can and go in and they'd pump you a 5-gallon can out of a tank that they had in the back, and you'd take it out and put it in your car. Kerosene the same way for your lights. Of course, we didn't have any electricity. And you didn't have, well, I would say the only thing that we had, and I can remember when we got our first phonograph, that we could play records. And I was probably about 15 years old then. So that was close to 1920. And of course, the first radios they had were all battery operated radios. And they were quite a thing. When you got a radio that you could hear them talk from someplace else, that was really something. I don't recall then what year radios probably came in on about, somewhere around 1920, I would say. Asked the question here about what was the most, what type of disease was the most common. Well, I don't know. There was a lot of measles and chicken pox and mumps among youngsters.
Flu was real bad at that
But
time.
in 1920, the flu was real bad. That was right after World War I. And there was a lot of people dying with the flu. It was real bad. Of course, they had spinal meningitis was some. Something else that was real.
Well, measles, mumps, chicken pox.
But those were common
Yeah.
diseases.
Well, I mean, at that time, they were
That's
hard.
spinal meningitis or some of these others were real bad. I had a sister that
Scarlet
got.
fever was real bad.
I had a sister that had appendicitis, and they took her to the hospital. And at that time, that was about 1914, 1915, and it was real something very, very unusual to have an operation for appendicitis. And the doctor that operated on her made a little miscut and cut 2 posts, and she died. She got, her intestines broke. There wasn't anything that they could do. Of course, nowadays, something like that's very common. But in those days, a lot of these things were very unusual that they have cures for today. In those days, doctors didn't know. When we speak about farm machinery, or things that we had, just like the old plow, and as I say, the old harrow, and binder that you cut grain with, and you'd have to shock it. And you'd have thrash machine that you thrash with to get the grain out. Of course, to harvest the corn, you'd have to pick that by hand. There wasn't any automatic corn picker, anything like that. And for heat, in the wintertime, to keep warm, why, there were coal mines here in East Peoria, which you could get coal, go down to the coal mine, and these miners would mine the coal right down there. But most of the people cut wood and heat the house with wood. But it's really changed. Later, I think I got my first tractor in about 38. And the neighbor got a corn picker. I used to help him pick corn, and he picked some corn for me. About 1940, I got a corn picker. Because I really used to hate to pick corn. I was shuck corn. It was one of the hardest jobs coming in the corn. Just to shuck corn. Then I farmed till 1944. For 1944, I had trouble with my back. And they wanted to operate and take a piece of bone out of my leg and put it in my back, and I had 3 stiff joints. I said, well, I'll just quit farming and do something else. So sold out in November of 1944. Moved to town, to Washington. And Washington at that time, was maybe 1,000 or 1,500 population.
Oh, no, what's that one?
Well, I would say 1,000. 1,500, oh yeah. And then I started working real estate with Herman. Herman was in the real estate business. And I went over to see Earl Johnson. And one time he had a farm out here right across from where we are now. And heard he wanted to sell it. I went over to see him. And while I was there, I asked him would he consider selling his Chevrolet dealership in Washington, which he had. Of course, we didn't have any cars because that was during right after World War II. I shouldn't say after because the war wasn't, I don't recall when it was over exactly, but this was in May of, about the 1st of May of 1945. And I bought the dealership from him. I got the Chevrolet dealership in 1945, May the 25th. I've been a dealer since. And I was 5 blocks east of the square then in the little garage, in which it didn't have that showroom which has now, that antique shop. That's where I started carpentry. Ross Boyd, is with me now, he was a mechanic. There was 3, Earl Johnson had 3 men working for him, and a girl worked 5 half days a week in the office. I bought the business. And in 1950, when we moved out here where we are now, I was out in the country then when I built that building. We were right out in the pasture and cornfield.
Yeah.
There was a cornfield right by the close to the building. That was out of the city limits, and the city wouldn't furnish me water at that time. So I had big bone oil. We heated the building with oil first to start with. Later we got gas. But I might go back a little bit when we were on the farm, and quite a few of the farmers got 32-volt light plants, little generators. They'd have those in their basement when they had electricity. And for telephones, the farmers all owned their own lines. A group of farmers would go together and build a telephone line. And they had a switchboard in Washington, where a lady would, if you called in, why, she'd have to plug in your line to whoever you wanted. Had to be someone there at the switchboard all the time, 24 hours a day. Wasn't making any calls.
And it was,
Atwater.
yeah, and you'd say, well, I want 1, 2, 5, 2, 3, or 4, 5, 6, or so and so. funny, one time, of course, we didn't live too far from the telephone office, and this lady says, well, wait just a minute, I'll look out the window, I think they're home. No, she says they're not home. And that's how personal and what a small town it was, you know, I mean, really.
And of course, none of the homes in the country had running water. Didn't have any water. The only water, some of them later on, while we would have a cistern. We had the house, the downspouts on the house. And then we'd have the cistern built, and then we'd pipe that water into the house and have one of these little pitcher pumps that you could pump in the water. But your drinking water and that, you would all have to carry from a well. Which we had for a well. Banks, well, there were two banks in Washington that I remember when I first can remember, the Denhart Bank and a Danforth Bank. And the Denhart Bank went broke. Actually, in the Depression, people thought they were worth all the money that people had in there. But people started to run on the bank. They started to say that, they started to gossip that, boy, this bank didn't have any money and it was going to go broke. So it seemed like everybody got scared and they went in and drew out the money that they had in there. First thing, they didn't have enough cash to pay their bank and pay the people, and they had to close the doors. But anybody that had money in the bank got $1 back for every dollar they had in there. No one lost any money. But they did close the bank down. It never reopened. Well, it never reopened under the Denhart Bank. This Henry Denhart was a wonderful man. He was really a real wonderful man, and he was worth a lot of money. And he did an awful lot of good for Washington.
Didn't he live where the White Funeral Home is
Yeah,
now?
he owned the White Funeral, this White Funeral Home, that's where he
Yeah,
lived.
that's, you know where that is?
Well,
Anyway, that's where he lived.
In South Maine there, just first funeral.
That was his home. I mean, it wasn't a funeral home, but it was his home.
And when we were kids and went to Sunday school, why, if we went to Sunday school and never missed a Sunday for a year, then he gave us a Bible, or we'd have a choice of a solid silver spoon. Or else we had a pin. It was a real nice pin that we could wear on our coat lapel. He'd give that to every child, every youngster that would go to Sunday school, every Sunday. Now, if you got sick, and your parents would write an excuse for you that you were sick that Sunday, why, that was all right. But other than that, well, you had to be there. You couldn't get an excuse to go to a ball game someplace or something else.
Hunting or fishing.
Horse and buggies, that was the way we went. I used to had about 5 miles or 6 miles to go see my girl, and I'd ride horseback. Go down, so I'd go see her Sunday afternoon and ride horseback. Ladies, ladies all wore long dresses. I hardly ever see a lady with a short dress at all. That was really something unusual. Lady wore dresses. Of course, the men all wore overalls, big overalls to work. We used to, as far as labor or jobs, well, the only jobs we would have would be among the neighbors that would need extra help. Us boys would work for the neighbors a lot of times. And most of the time, the going wage back, I would say from 1920 to 1930 was about $2.50 a day. You really worked for that. It was hard work. It was different work than we get today. It was really hard work, making hay or stocking grain or thrashing. things of that type. Or we'd have to help haul gravel in. Take the team and haul gravel, scoop the load on by hand, of course. And unload it. We'd have to scoop the load. Indians, of course, I never remember about any Indians. But we used to find a lot of Indian arrows, that they made out of flint. The Indians had made out of flint that we used to kill things or shoot. We used to find a lot of those. And when it would rain or we'd plow a field, why, after rain, when we was working, while we would find these arrows. I don't have any anymore. I gave mine away or something. Brother Ed has really a nice board of Indian arrows. John Kellner out here, he has another nice board with a lot of nice Indian. As far as the cost of land, farmland, well, I don't know, I don't recall exactly, but I would say farmland was probably worth about $50 an acre. Of course, if it was halfway decent land, some land, timberland, wouldn't even bring near that.
What is that in comparison with today?
Oh, well, of course, there isn't anything like that today.
What would be the difference in your land then and what the...
Of course, today, what this land around here, any of this around here is $1,500 or $2,000 an acre. Now, because, especially, well, if any, because even decent farmland anywhere around is $2,000 an acre. As far as our tools, where do we get our tools? Well, we got those at the hardware store. Except, like a lot of times when we cut wood, we made our own wedge, and we would make our own wood maul to drive that wedge with, to split wood. We sold a lot of cordwood. We would cut a lot of wood in the wintertime and sell it to town to these people that had fireplaces in there. Or to my uncle that I mentioned, he had a big store and he had a bakery. And he fired his big oven with cordwood. So we would haul the cordwood. Of course, in the wintertime, we did a lot of hunting for rabbits too. We used to sell rabbits. We were allowed to, people used to buy rabbits to eat. We got anywhere from 25 to 40 cents a piece for a rabbit. Take them on Fridays when we took the butter and eggs to town. We took these rabbits, sell them, cut them. And we also had what we might call peddlers, which was a Watkins man and a Raleigh man. And they'd come around in a little covered wagon with a horse or maybe two horses. And they had all kinds of medical supplies, all kinds of pills, and, I don't know, remedies of all kinds. Even for poultry, chickens, pigs, even some for livestock. And then we had gypsies. Gypsies would come around and they'd have maybe, 3 or 4 wagons or buggies. And they was always wanting to tell you, the women wanted to tell your fortune. But they wouldn't work, and they'd always come and beg for some grain for their horses or something to eat or something like that. And then they'd come and they'd stop along the road someplace and camp overnight. And if you didn't watch them, at night they'd steal your chickens. They were always real shrewd people. They were what we call gypsies. And they'd travel all over the country. They never worked. I don't know where they got their money, but just from probably stealing things and that they lived. And Saturday at home was always the day to bake. On Saturday, Mother would bake her bread and coffee cake and things for the week. We never bought bread, hardly ever bought bread in town. We had homemade bread. And just like butchering, why the neighbors would all get together and we'd help each other butcher. Butcher hogs for the meat for the year. Cure that meat and fry it down, fry the sausage down, put it in the jars. Lard, of course, we'd have that for cooking. The hams and bacon we'd cure, hang in a smokehouse and smoke, and they would keep all year. We'd help each other, neighbors would help each other do that. Same with cutting wood. We'd cut these trees down, and then we'd have a circle saw, which we'd saw this wood, saw it in short pieces. And we'd have to split that up from our fire to keep, or else we burnt those chunks in the furnace.
Remember any major crimes that went on back then?
Very few. I would say there was very few crimes that I know. I can remember when I was quite young, we had a policeman in Washington, and his name was Frank Bozar. And he was a real good guy. He was a buddy of all the boys. If some boys did something that they shouldn't, why, he would get next to the other boys and find out who they were. But he was a real
Never had
nice
any
guy.
trouble with them.
No, but if you did something that you weren't supposed to, he wouldn't arrest you. He'd tell you now. He said, "No, you shouldn't do that. You did that, and that was wrong. You shouldn't do it. Don't do it anymore." And most of the time, they would listen.
Yeah,
They wouldn't do it.
they always respected that man.
But he was a real good policeman. He really helped you. I mean, if you needed something or if you was in trouble, he would really help you. I think it's, of course, crimes are so much different today that I don't know. Sometimes I think the policemen don't have the respect or the help. I mean, it would help people as
Patience,
much
they don't have the patience with it.
that they used to have. And for a fire department, of course they had volunteer, but I can remember when my uncle's store that he had, that grocery store, all they had was a cart with hose on it. And you pulled that cart by hand. That was the fire department originally that they had. And then later on, after that big fire in Washington, that's when they got this new truck that they had there, and it was in the parade, and actually it was up in our blue building here a short time ago. I don't know where they got it now, but
That,
the old LaFrance truck.
Steinley probably?
Well, no, that was when Henry Esther's store burnt in Peters
Oh, yeah.
grocery store
Oh,
back
yeah.
in about 1918 to 19.
Oh.
And he built the new store. He built the other grocery store out, Peters, and he built the new store. And we hauled all the bricks for that store from East Peoria with horses and wagons, my brother, which is Bob's hardware store now. We hauled all the bricks from East Peoria for that building.
Was there a lot of people going to World War I too from this area? A lot of people
Going to the war?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah, quite a lot. You bet. I would say if they didn't go, if the draft and someone didn't go, why, they was really looked down. And of course, Caterpillar Tractor was a real small factory at that time. Caterpillar Tractor was a good place to work, but it was much dirtier, and of course the working conditions weren't near what they are today. And I wouldn't say,
But quite a few, in fact, there were quite a few that dropped out of school and enlisted in the Civil War. They would
Right.
drop out of school and enlist.
But Caterpillar Tractor originally was Holt Tractor Company. Then there was a Herschel Manufacturing Company in East Area. Those were the places that fellows went to work. There was an Avery factory in Averville when we were younger too. They built Avery tractors. They also built a glide car here in Peoria, in what is now Pioneer Park. Well, they built a car out here. It was a glide car. Times have really changed since that I.
Did the Depression really affect this area bad?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my, yes. Oh, horrible.
Terrible. You couldn't get a job, boy.
10 cents for a loaf of bread.
Yeah, 10 cents. I sold hogs to Peoria for $2.10 a hundred. And milk, I got 87 cents
It was
for
horrible.
12 gallon of milk, 100 pounds of milk, 87 cents.
15 cents, 15 cents to go to the movie.
Well, corn was about, I would say, 10 or 12 cents a bushel. And a lot of people at that time couldn't afford to buy coal, and they burned corn in the stores for heat. Of course, when you farmed with horses, we didn't get the crops in the way they do now, and we had a different, we had open pollinated corn, we didn't have hybrid corn, and the corn didn't mature like it does now. A lot of years we'd have poor corn, soft corn, maybe it was moldy like when you shucked it, when you harvested it. Well, it's much different today because of this hybrid corn, it's altogether different, it matures much better. If we got, at that time, if we'd get 50 to 75 bushel of corn to the acre, we had good corn. Crops were much less than what they are today. Of course, taxes were much less. People didn't have much money. And it was quite different, really. Today, why, it seems like everyone has, wages are so that everyone can afford good things and live good. At that time, they didn't. There was lots of families that didn't hardly have nothing to live. No clothes, didn't have money to buy clothes. And think, well, they should get out and work, but there weren't any jobs in that. Or very few jobs.